I'm Rashid Khaldi. I'm the Edward Said Professor of Modern Arab Studies. I'm also the co-director of the Center for Palestine Studies. Thank you all for coming this evening. We're excited to present something that is both a book talk and a conversation. The book, which as you know in the advertisements, is by Professor Yasser Suleiman. It's titled Being Palestinian, Personal Reflections on Palestinian Identity in the Diaspora. I just found out that the father of somebody in attendance is the author of one of the pieces in Yasser's book, so this is personal for many of us. Let me say a few words about the center and about our book talks this semester. The Center for Palestine Studies promotes the academic study of Palestine by supporting research, teaching, and intellectual collaboration among scholars inside the university and outside. The center provides an institutional home for faculty, postdocs, and students, graduates and undergraduates, in a variety of fields. We've put together a number of events this semester. We have a number of others coming up. Film screenings, play performances, book talks, symposia. The best way to keep in track is to get on our mailing list, and you do that by going on our website, www.columbia.edu/cu/Palestine, or the Facebook page of the Center for Palestine Studies. This talk today is part of a series we call the Palestine Library. When I was a graduate student, there were no good books on Palestine. When I was an undergraduate, there were no good books at all on Palestine. Today, there's a plethora of wonderful, wonderful material, academic, scholarly, literary, and otherwise. And we have done a series of book talks featuring some of the newest, most exciting work in this field. We do many other things. We have an event with the filmmaker May Musri coming up in 2 weeks. You can find out about that on our website. Before I go much further, let me introduce this evening's speaker and Professor Hamid Dabashi, who will give Professor Suleiman a proper introduction, who will be in conversation with him. Professor Suleiman is His Majesty Sultan Qaboos bin Said Chair of Modern Arab Studies and a Fellow of King's College, Cambridge. King's College, in case you don't know, is one of the fanciest operations on earth. They had as their bursar John Maynard Keynes, Lord Keynes to us, who managed to collect a tidy packet in terms of their endowment, a large part of which they put in some of the finest wine on earth, which is kept in the cellar of King's College. It also is one of the most beautiful colleges at Cambridge, which is saying a lot. So Professor Suleiman, in addition to having the chair of Modern Arabic Studies that I mentioned, is a fellow of King's College. His many published works include Arabic in the Fray, Ideology and Cultural Politics, another book, Arabic, Self and Identity, a Study in Conflict and Displacement, and A War of Words, Language and Conflict in the Middle East. There are many others. I won't bore you further with them. Let me now introduce my colleague and friend, Professor Hamid Dabashi, who will in turn present this evening's event. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming in this rainy day. A few words of gratitude, first and foremost, to my distinguished colleague, Professor Khalidi, for introducing and initiating the session. Second, my gratitude to Center for Palestine Studies, particularly to Tomer and JJ for their relentless, tireless work to make today's event possible. And also my other distinguished colleagues in Center for Palestine Studies, of which we are very, very proud. Now, today's... if you would kindly please turn off your phones. It would be, I assure you, there's nothing more exciting than what is about to happen on your Facebook or whatever it is that you're trying to check. Now, today's event, as you know, is a celebration of and the launch of wonderful, unique, unprecedented book. As Rashid said, there are plethoras of books on Palestine, and unfortunately so. However, this book has a peculiar significance that I think its place was missing in the spectrum of Palestinian studies, namely personal reflections on what it means to be a Palestinian. I understand that the book has been in the making for about a decade. And rightly so. It is not many, I mean, I'm blessed with many Palestinian friends, and if you were to push, ask what does it mean to be a Palestinian, it's a very difficult question to say what it means to be a Palestinian. And when I was asked by my friend and colleague, Professor Suleiman, to write something endorsing the book, and I was reading it, of course, paramount is Edward Said's magnificent essay, Permission to Narrate, which is on our mind when we think simply the Palestinians have had been denied the possibility of narrating their version of history or their account of history. But the fact that the book has been in the making for 10 years, for a decade, is also an indication of generational changes that is happening. Now we have fortunately, two of the authors, Najla Saeed and Attisam, who will actually read from their account for us. There are generational changes that are happening, what it means to be a Palestinian. Both, as you know, for Palestinians, Nakba, the disaster, the catastrophe, is a dividing line of history. But then there are also accounts before Nakba, and there are accounts after Nakba, and then there are accounts that are of the younger generation of Palestinians who are beginning in a way to reclaim what it means to be Palestinian. So I remember a wonderful conversation when Edward went to Palestine that he had with a number of Palestinians from within 1948. What does it mean to be a Palestinian? And every generation, in a way, is entitled to define what it means to be Palestinian. It is not carved in stone. But what is exciting and promising is how every generation, every gestation of what it means to be a Palestinian is actually a new way of growth on the soil of Palestine. We are very blessed and honored that Professor Yasser Suleiman agreed to come to Colombia. We're beyond happiness of what it means for us to be the launching place of being Palestinian here in the US. And the nature of this conversation, which I promise we'll do within 30 minutes before we ask Najla and Attisam to join us, is more or less, Yasser, about your initial idea. What prompted you? Did you have a question of identity crisis of what it means to be Palestinian, or was it your own, your own son? What it means for him to be a Palestinian? Because usually the intention of the author is something, but what happens to the text and in time is something else. So initially, maybe you could share the provocation that prompted you to do this book.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Hamid. Can we just use first terms because that would be easier? For the introduction, you asked me if I was experiencing a crisis. I think if I were not to thank all the people that I ought to thank, then I will have a crisis. So let me begin by thanking lots of people. Thank Professor Rashid Khalidi for hosting the event at the Center for Palestine Studies. To thank you, Hamid, for being a gracious host on a personal level. I want to thank all the contributors, and some of the contributors are here tonight. I want to thank them for having accepted the invitation to write, but also having kept faith with me, because this particular book could have ended up as a good idea that would never see the day of light. So the contributors, the publisher, I want also to thank Philip. Where is Philip? Philip? There you are. Philip Rushworth. He worked in my center, and he was also a student, postgraduate student, and we became friends. And Philip was a great help towards the end. He almost came and he rescued me. He's a good sort of, you would want to have him on the side of your swimming pool so that if you drown, Philip would be there to rescue you. So I thought tonight he might just put in his swimming trunks and just come and show. To thank all of those people. But also, I think Colombia is the right place for this launch, because this book is dedicated to the memory of Edward Said. And I wouldn't have done it anywhere else. There are launches in other parts of the world, but I wanted this to be the first launch, to celebrate the memory of Edward Said, whom I met several times. He came to Scotland, he got his honorary doctorate, and one of the first pages, you'll see me, a younger person, well-fed, and sort of with Edward. He was, I write about him in the prologue, and I talk about him. What a wonderful person Edward was when he came to visit. We went, Ibrahim Mohawi and I, we traveled around in Scotland, and he wanted to see several places. He also he knew so much about whiskey, I mean, Edward Said. And he just said, take me around, show me all, you know. So we went around, and I said, this guy said, oh, I have it, I had it, you know, it was given to me. And I said, there's nothing we can give you, Edward. But he was such a great, he was a guest, but he was such a great host also. Because while I was driving him with Ibrahim Mohawi, he never allowed me to pay a single penny. I was actually so well fed. I must have put on a half a kilogram during the 4 days we were just going around Scotland and Edinburgh in particular. So just thank you all, and thank you Miriam, thank you Najla for coming here today. Now, a crisis. Yes, I had a crisis. I tried to explain it in the prologue. It's a prologue and it's not an introduction, because a prologue demands an epilogue, and I was intending to write an epilogue, and in the end I discovered that I really couldn't write an epilogue, so I was just stuck with the prologue. In 2002, I was given a job at SOAS as Dean of Languages, Literatures and Cultures, and I accepted the job for 5 months. And in the end, I went back to Scotland. I think partly because Avinaum was in Scotland. We shared in Scotland together. And it is just, I felt that I put down roots in Scotland, in Edinburgh in particular. I wanted to go back to my roots, to my Scottish roots. I had my kilt, my children had their kilts, you can see my son there. I could do the stripping the willow, I could do dashing white sergeant, I could do all of those things. I could do Rabbie Barons and all that. I could understand Scottish. I couldn't speak Scottish, but I could understand Scottish, Scotland and all the rest of it. And Scotland was a great place because Scotland somehow is a surrogate sort of kind of Palestine. It feels the pain of having been conquered by another nation, and I just felt at home in a place that feels that history wasn't really kind to it, and I felt this is a great sort of surrogate for Palestine. And then my wife recognized Shahla. She said, "Yasser, you're getting bored with Edinburgh." After I'd gone back to Scotland from London, and in 2006 she said, "You're getting bored. You must get out." So in the end, I got this job in Cambridge, so I decided to go. And it was such a traumatic experience for me. I was at King's College, and by the way, also Edward Said is very well connected to King's College. He spent a lot of time there, or some time there, and gave lectures there. And by the way, about the wine, when I got to King's College, I was looking at they give you as a fellow, you get the statement of accounts, and I discovered, perhaps, I hope, Philip, can you edit this out later on? Or? That my college spends about £250,000, about £400,000 on wine. $4,000 on wine, and it's free wine. So it is a great place in that respect, and many other respects. So I was in Cambridge, and I was really traumatized by the move from Scotland to Cambridge. At night, I would literally sleep in my bed and I would be sweating. I would just wanted to be up in Scotland. During the day, I was happy in Cambridge. So I was living this sort of double life. At night, I wanted to be up in Scotland, and during the day in Cambridge. And I was thinking of this whole experience in terms of who I am, my Palestine, I thought Scotland was almost becoming home, and now I'm away from Scotland. I felt really very unsettled. I couldn't put down roots anywhere. And I started to think of our lives. And in Scotland, we had a house, people here, was built in 1862, and we were actually camping inside this house. We had no fixtures. Everything is just designed so that when I'm told that Palestine is there and you can go back to it, I will just put everything on top of a car or carry it on my back and just go back to Palestine. So I felt, well, there must be other people who are grappling with the same issue. But let me add also something to it. I think I was somehow wanted to do this book for non-Palestinians to read about Palestine, but also a book for the new generation, including my children. I thought it would be really good for them to learn about Palestine in this particular way. So the idea of I wanted to ask 101 Palestinians, not 102, we ended up with 102, each to write 1,500 words. And it took a long time, it really did. Partly my fault, but also partly the authors of this book fault. It's good to see you. My ex-students former students from Cambridge, it's good to see you. But I was determined that this would be done. The brief was very simple. Please write from the heart and don't write about politics. That was the instruction. Don't write about politics, high politics. Of course, it is a very political book, but please don't write about politics. Quite a lot of the people who wrote, particularly men, sent me political manifestos. So it's almost like let's go, guys, and Fidaiyin and all the rest of it. And it was very hard to convince them, and some of them we had to turn down. Some people were very upset with us, and they just would write. I was blessed with Philip, because Philip would write to them, and I think that Philip is turning people down, but it was I who was turning people down. Everything that you have received from Philip, it's something that I have seen and we discussed and said to you. So yes, there was a crisis.
The other question, Yasser, is there are all kinds of Palestinians. There's a demography, there's age issues, gender issues, 48, 67 camps, diaspora, Europe, etc. What were the criteria? How did you select?
Well, I wanted to have 101 simply because I just was playing on the 1001, so 101 is a really good number. So the criteria were, first of all, I wanted almost equal numbers of men and women, and if you count them, 50% are men, 50% are women, 51, because there are 102. I also wanted to have different generations, Also, I wanted to have good representation of Christians, Muslims. Actually, there's also a Baha'i inside it. And I looked for a Palestinian Jew, or Palestinian Jews. And I found one in Berlin, but it was too late, because I wanted a Palestinian Jew to write about Palestine. And this person in Berlin considers himself to be a refugee, a Palestinian refugee from Jaffa. So I was looking for that, because I wanted to bring all these in different varieties. And it was about the English-speaking diaspora. Unfortunately, we didn't go to New Zealand or Australia, but it's North America and the United Kingdom. So those were the criteria. We selected a small number initially, and then snowballed. George, who is written in the book, and he's one of the sort of veteran generations, not older, the veteran generation, was suggested by a friend of mine, Ibrahim Muhawi, who seems to now turns out to be related to him. Amal at the back there, she also was suggested by Ibrahim Muhawi. So friends suggested friends and suggested friends. So snowballing provided us with a large pool of people.
A related question, Yasser, you said that you asked your authors to write from the heart. It's a question of language. I mean, you are a linguist and you know the significance of language. But I'm not particular that this had to be in Arabic. For me, language belongs to people. whatever language people speak is there. So English is a Palestinian language, so far as they opt to write in English. But was there a conscious decision that you wanted this to be in English and not in Arabic?
Yes, there was. The reason for it is that if it was in Arabic, I was hoping that it would be translated into English, so I thought, do it in English. At the same time, if you wanted to go down the generations, the younger Palestinians who live in the English-speaking world might not have that sort of great command of the Arabic language, so it would have also excluded them. English was a conscious choice, but also it was a lazy choice. It is the easiest thing to do, just to write in English. But my children, although they know Arabic well and they can read it, I wanted my children to read it in the future, and I just wanted to read it. I wanted them to read it in English, not in Arabic, because the Arabic wouldn't be able to. The Arabic is not good enough for them to get all the nuance. And it is not really written for Palestinians in the diaspora. It's written for, I say in the prologue, I'm writing it for non-Palestinians, because I wanted non-Palestinians to feel and to know and to experience how Palestinians think about Palestine from the
but
diaspora.
as you know, no author is in complete control of what his intention is. I mean, the gist of the question, Yasser, is now you have edited this book and read all of these various reflections on being Palestinian. What did you learn? What did you learn in terms of changing conception of being Palestinian, a contemporary conception of being Palestinian, and the unfolding future of being Palestinian? And perhaps a more provocative question: do you think the idea of being Palestinian is in danger in any way?
Well, I don't think it is in danger at all. The younger generations are picking up Palestine in a different idiom, different inflections from the ones that maybe the older generations are using to, or are committed to, or they articulate. But let me go back and say, I didn't really want people to define themselves or to define Palestine. I wanted people just to talk about Palestine. And they just could talk about it in any way they like. Now, when you read the book, it is full of contradictions. Some people say this about Palestine, then you'll have somebody else who says something different about Palestine. And that was a great experience for me, because there isn't any one fixed meaning for Palestine. Palestine seems to be a place that is described in different ways by people who might agree on how they describe it. They might disagree, and I think there you'll find that there are some disagreements. But also that the descriptions of Palestine, the conceptualizations of Palestine are contextual, in the sense that they are to some extent shaped by people's experiences and where people are located. But the thing that really gave me a great hope, and still gives me hope, is that Palestinians were not defining themselves in relation to as non-Israelis. They were defining themselves as Palestinians. So the definitions, practically all the descriptions, are all inside the descriptions. They are not sort of the vis-a-vis kind of description. I am Palestinian vis-a-vis X. It is just an endogenous kind of description from within. And that is something that struck me about the way that Palestinians define Palestine in this book. Because the book, in a way, is a community of people talking to each other about one experience, not one experience, one place, that has multiple meanings. They talk to each other, but also they are interlocuting with people who read the book. I've read it so many times before it was published, twice after it had been published, and it speaks to me in different ways at different times. So there isn't any one meaning to it. And so the great thing about this is it just, after I've done this book, if you were to say to me, what is Palestine, or how do you, I just can't tell you. I've discovered also that by dissecting Palestine, people might sort of kill it. Coleridge said we dissect to kill. I don't think this is the case here. I think the dissection or the descriptions create so many different meanings and so many different colors and so many different impressions of it. One of the things I can say about it is that if you read the book and read the reflections, you can smell Palestine, you can hear Palestine, you can touch Palestine. Palestine is a place that engages your senses. And that is what all your senses are, so you can also see Palestine, the Debke. People talk about the Debke quite a lot. So the Debke, songs about the trees, the flora, about the foods. So all your senses are really engaged, and Palestine emerges as a sensual kind of place that you can relate to, that you can touch, and that you can smell. You can also bite. It's that kind of place.
There is another aspect of it, and then we'll stop. I think we should have Abdesam and Najla read. And that has to do with being Palestinian in a more metaphoric sense. You know, somebody said about me that Hamid is the only Palestinian who knows so much about Iran. There is a metaphoric aspect of me. I mean, I can't remember in my own life a period that the question of Palestine hasn't been central to who I am and operating in politics. And I'm not the only one, not only in the region, in Latin America, in Africa, in China, in India. So in that sense, I think the book has implication beyond whatever expectations that you had. It's sort of a more global, a comparative conception of what Palestine means, which is not just a Palestinian issue, not even an Arab issue. And in fact, as I've shared with you, I have questions for Palestine being just an Arab issue because it is a global, comparative issue. Any thoughts on that?
Two thoughts. The first one is that this is not really about being Palestinian, although the title says being Palestinian. It's about becoming Palestinian, it's about performing Palestine. And many of the pieces tell you, this is at the moment that I started to get interested in Palestine. The university seems to be a place where a lot of that takes place. So it's about performing Palestine, it's about doing Palestine, it's about becoming Palestinian. And the being really undersells or doesn't do justice to the quality of the analyses that you have in the book. That's point number one. Point number two, I agree with you. At some point, until it knows, I wanted to include people of non-Palestinian descent that I consider to be Palestinians. And I think there's actually a space for a book for people like the Dabashis in it. And I'll tell you why, because when I was in Scotland, I was the vice chair and chair of the Scottish Palestinian Forum. And there were people who became Palestinian, although they are not of a Palestinian descent. And I think the way to it is the globality of it, to me, and I've written about it in a little article in the newspaper, which is Palestine is an ethical space. And if you read the prologue, you'll see me hinting at it. When I went to the UK, we couldn't talk about Palestine. I remember Fawzi al-Asmar coming to talk to us and being just chased out of the hall at the University of St. Andrews. And then we turned to South Africa. I became interested in South Africa. And we did Palestine through South Africa. And then South Africa came into Palestine. And I think if you think of Palestine, and I keep saying all the time that if you're looking for a political cause, if you're interested in politics, and if you're looking for a political cause that has morality and ethics and has all those dimensions built into it, then Palestine is one great candidate for that cause. And for me, anyone, right, who adopts that cause becomes Palestinian. So I wanted to include some of the people I worked with on divestment in the Presbyterian Church in Scotland. I wanted to bring them in. And I think it was a great error on my part that I had not invited them to write, because it would really have been a very good position to take, that Palestine is not for the Palestinians or Palestinians of Palestinian descent. I say actually in the book, you'll see in the introduction, an Israeli, no, I said this elsewhere, but I said an Israeli who thinks that Palestine is an ethical cause, an Israeli Jew, right, and stands by it, and I have friends like that. There are people in this room who are like that. They are Palestinians. So Palestine is an ethical cause. It is not an anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish kind of cause. And I think the globality of it comes from that ethical stance and from that morality attached to the ethical representations of Palestine.
What I might add, Yasser, to that it is this commitment to the Palestinian cause as a moral ethical cause is not something that you do for Palestine, as actually has a catalytic effect on your whatever cause that it is that you have, whatever that might be.
Actually, the book is full of that. I mean,
Yeah.
the great thing about, you see it quite in many places, when people say that I am Palestinian and this is what Palestine means to me, they're always associated with standing up for the downtrodden, for all sorts of causes, social, political, that Palestine becomes a metaphor.
Exactly.
Palestine becomes a symbolic icon that goes beyond Palestine, and that's very important to remember. It's in the book.
To the degree, again, I might add, that the transformation of Palestine into a metaphor doesn't cover the fact that Palestine is a gushing wound, that is a reality out there that I would also add that despite the fact that I was not asked to write a chapter, I did make it between the two covers as somebody who endorsed it. Azmi Bishara, me, Noam Chomsky, and Karan Nablusi. And I don't know why your editor decided to put Chomsky and Azmi Bishara on the back cover and not Dabashi. But I'll pick it up with Speaking of performing Palestine, I think it's time, don't you agree, to ask Najla Saeed and Ibtisam Barakat, in whichever order, alphabetical? Please.
Najla, that's cheating.
Everybody, this is Ibtisam Barakat, one of the authors. Please, would you want to stand there?
يا ظلام الليل خيم أنا لا أخشى الظلام ليس بعد الليل إلا فجر حب يتسامى. On the 3rd of February at 10:35 p.m. Palestine time, my father died. When the phone rang with this message, I was stunned. How could he not be alive? In the United States, where I lived, it was only 2:30 p.m. So if he died at 10:35, was he still alive in America? I bargained with God for 8 more hours of his life, then set my alarm clock and waited. One by one, the hours escaped like moths, fluttering toward the light. And as they did, I saw the face of my father, a quiet man. He was tall and strong, but afraid of the darkness, afraid of graveyards and their lonely silence. Living on the West Bank in harsh conditions following the Six-Day War and the occupation of Palestinian cities that followed, he was also afraid that he could neither protect nor provide for us. My father was the one with the least schooling in our family, having finished only the 1st grade and half of the 2nd. So as a teenager, at the end of every week, I sat with him, added up his work hours, and helped him figure out his pay. As I did this, I was aware of his hands resting on the table near me, weathered and wounded. They revealed the harsh reality of his life. When the work hours did not add up to what my father hoped, those hands clenched into fists. Snatching the pencil from me, he would demand a recalculation. Then cried when my total remained the same. This meant that family purchases, like meat or olive oil, would need to be postponed. What was never postponed throughout the years of my childhood and adolescence, however, were the little treats my father brought home with him at the end of each day: sesame, popcorn, candy, salted seeds, nuts. They cost money, but he bought them anyway. The children need clothes more than they need these treats, Mother would tell him. But these treats put happiness on their faces, even if just for a moment or two. He insisted. Now the clock announced 10:35 p.m. My father was dead in both Ramallah time
I'll just read a few more sentences. Now the clock announced 10:35 p.m. My father was dead in both Ramallah time and America time. I felt a glimmer of desire to die too. Dad, do you want me to go with you? I asked what I imagined was my father's soul venturing into the darkness alone. I remembered that the one thing my father was never sure about was whether anyone would think about him after his death. The last time I saw him, he gave me his hattak scarf and prayer rock, and tilting his head said, "Etkarrini, remember me." Now, I wanted to give my father exactly what he would have asked for. I wanted to think of him and to think of him in a way that honored the traditions he believed in.
I'm very pleased to read it because it's one of the most, it's an incredibly moving piece, where she mourns her father, Tissam mourns her father for 40 days and nights. Never goes out, but at the end she emerges a writer. And it really is a great moving piece. Thanks, Tissam.
But I want to do something though, now
Please.
that I've stopped crying. My dad used to bring us sesame treats and candy. And in celebration of being Palestinian and in celebration of my dad, I brought candy. And in Palestinian tradition, we don't give out candy. We throw it at people. We toss it at people. Sesame candy at all. Sometimes they do it there. You guys are fine.
We're here, don't forget us.
Thank you.
No, she can't disappear.
Mine's a little different mood-wise, so that was incredibly moving. Okay. Being Palestinian is complicated. Complicated is the word my therapist, friends, and mother use to describe me most often, or more precisely, to explain why I'm 39, I'm actually 42, and unmarried, that's how long I've been there. Or why I may not have gotten a particular acting job, or why I got in an argument with someone about something and possibly seething. If I try to come up with a metaphor for what it is like to really be Palestinian, or perhaps I should say what it is like to be Palestinian in New York City, where I've lived all my life, all I can think of is carrying a really heavy, entirely unwieldy bag of groceries, perhaps, or rocks, maybe. So I think it is a pretty clear metaphor already, but I will elucidate just in case. So imagine you have to carry a lot of heavy things from point A to point B. Like, as I said, a couple of bags of groceries. Not just a simple day's worth of groceries, like a box of cereal, a loaf of bread, or a banana, but rather a large and varied selection of heavy, precariously packaged items, more along the lines of 14 glass bottles filled with fizzy water, 2 watermelons, 18 oranges, and 5 gallons of milk, and some eggs, and 2 jars of peanut butter. Glass jars, I mean. You see where I'm going with this? Yes? Well, then now you have an idea of what I'm trying to say, because that is exactly what it is like to be Palestinian, especially in America. especially in New York City, where I've lived my entire life. You have to carry these bags and you have no help. But if you balance the weight in each hand equally and you pay particular attention to your posture and alignment and you walk carefully and precisely, you will be able to get to your point B with some effort but ultimate success. And then you start walking. And the bags feel heavier than you thought they would, so you try to reorganize the way you're carrying them, but you have to be careful of the eggs and the clanking bottles and your own back. You consider a different hand position and you try carrying the bags around your shoulders like a purse, but the plastic handles are small and they make your shoulders feel like they're suffocating. And you become convinced that they will break and the groceries will go flying all over the place. So you put the bags down and breathe. You remember suddenly that you have a pair of gloves with you. You are certain they will help. And then you can only find one of them. And suddenly the 5 blocks you have to walk seem like 5,000. And you feel a lump in your throat and just want to give up, but you can't. So you take your time and you adjust and you stop and you reorganize and rebalance and struggle and you finally make it home. But you are frustrated and sad and you hate everyone else on the street for having a tiny purse with nothing in it, and you wonder what you did to deserve having to carry all this crap. And then you realize you didn't do anything wrong. You did nothing to deserve it. You're just in an uncomfortable circumstance and you can't do anything about it. In real life, these bags manifest as circumstances you have lived through a few too many times. Circumstances like the fear that gripped you every time you were invited to a bar mitzvah in junior high school because you were certain that once you got to the synagogue, you wouldn't be let in, or you would be told that there had been a mistake and you weren't actually invited. Or later, then, when you realize that to almost everyone who is not Palestinian, the definition of a Palestinian is a person who hates Jews. And then you have to tell every Jewish person you meet that you don't hate them, because no matter what, they will ask if you do, before you've even been properly introduced, even though you hate no one and just desperately want people to like you. And if you meet a Jewish man who is romantically interested in you, you have to patiently wait out the inevitable "what would my parents say" monologue after your first kiss, and smile sweetly and laugh at them at this circumstance, which they most certainly do not realize is a circumstance you have been in many times before. Then there are the political arguments in which you have to breathe through the comments about terrorism and those savage people. Granted, these comments are always followed by a, "but not you, you're different." But you know this is coming before it happens, and yet each time it punches you in the gut like someone's steel-toed boot, kicking and knocking the wind out of you. You have to breathe through that too and silently pray that the rage you feel boiling in your stomach will not reveal itself by forcing the top of your head to blow off and bang into the ceiling. But there are good moments too, and funny, ironic, story-worthy circumstances sometimes. Like when the old lady sitting next to you at your Jewish friend's wedding asks if you're Jenny's friend from Jerusalem. And you say, "Yes, actually I am," knowing full well that I'm not who she meant. And then there's the mezuzah left outside the door of your apartment by earlier tenants, the one you decide to remove since you are not Jewish, until you wonder if your neighbors will think you anti-Semitic for doing so, since you're Palestinian. But then you get your giggles when 6 months later, Lubavitchers come knocking on your door because of it, and you say to them, "Oh, hi, yes, I know I have a mezuzah, but I'm Palestinian. But I didn't remove it because I didn't want anyone to think I hated Jews." Isn't that funny? And then they look at you like you have 17 heads and take off immediately while you roll on the floor for hours. Mostly, though, it's when you realize that you know exactly what it is like to be marginalized, left out, disregarded, and forgotten, and that you can empathize with pretty much anyone's struggle, that you remember it is really kind of not so bad to be Palestinian. There really is nothing more powerful than a true goose-bumply feeling of solidarity, humanity, love, empathy, and pure connection. And so in the end, I guess being Palestinian might actually be worth its cumbersome, unwieldy, often torturous weight. Sometimes.
Thank you, Hassan. Thank you, Majda. I think we can open for conversation with the rest of you, but before that, I was going to ask Yasser if you could explain this magnificent cover. What is that?
Right. I just wanted to thank Issam and Najla for reading, and in fact to say to you that the book makes you laugh, it makes you cry, it makes you wonder I've actually cried several times. I used to say to Philip, there are some pieces that made me cry time after time, and Neshla and others make me sort of laugh but cry at the same time, because you're laughing and crying at the same time. So, and I think this is part of the experience of being Palestinian in diaspora, and the book does offer us a very good selection of feelings, emotions, and what we have heard today is just an example, tiny example of that. Concerning the cover, well, I wanted, because the prologue is a multi-genre, my prologue. It's not an analysis of, it provides some analysis of the pieces, but at the same time, it provides reflections. It provides my own reflection on Palestine. So what did I want to do in it? Now, if you look at the left side of this of the slide there, I think most people immediately recognize that this is Jerusalem, and you recognize it from the Dome of the Rock. Yeah, that is, you know. But the iconic picture of Jerusalem is the Dome of the Rock, and I really wanted to change the gaze, and I wanted to put the church before the Dome of the Rock. I wanted you to see the church, because simply I am very dissatisfied, very unhappy with the representations of Jerusalem that seem to associate it with Islam over the other religions, and Christianity in particular. I wanted at some point, looked for a way of bringing something Jewish. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible. So I brought the church before the Dome of the Rock, to emphasize that Christianity is a heritage of all Palestinians. It is my heritage as a Muslim. Jesus does not belong to Christians in Palestine only. Also, Jesus belongs to me. And as a little boy, I remember doing Khamis al-Bayd, which is, so we just meet in the streets, and Christian boys and Muslim boys would be just using, it is the colored eggs, and we'd be just, I didn't realize that we were doing something that belonged to us, all of us as Jews and Christians. And actually, what Tissam did, which is quite interesting today, she threw this at you. Now, if you go into Exodus, the Old Testament, into Exodus, you will see that part of one of the best, actually, anthropological descriptions of Palestine is in the Old Testament. And the idea of throwing rus and melh at weddings in particular is actually recorded in the Old Testament. So what you've actually done is something which predates the Old Testament. It's not like it came with the Old Testament. It is something that was there in Palestine. It was absorbed by these different cultural traditions. And I also, let me say to you this, my mother is the most Jewish mother that ever. Palestinian mother, is she? My mother is entirely, and I'm talking about my mother. I thought you were questioning my mother. So I'll tell you, my mother is incredibly, she's the best Jewish mother I have known. Give you examples of that. First of all, food, but not that. Her friends, I tell this famous story about my mother. So her friends, Hassan and Ali, came to see her mama. I was there, and she wanted to show off. She said, yes, sir? I said, yes. She said, what is the name of the university? Where do you work? Because I can't. I say, it's in Britain. She said, but can you remind me of that? So I said, University of Cambridge. Oh, Cambridge. You know, I said, fine, Cambridge. It is that? How old is it? Is it as old as the University of Jordan? You know, she knows it was. So I said, oh, my mother is a bit older. It's, you know, how old? It's 1280, something, 1208, something like that. And then she said, do you have a car? And I say, well, she said, you must have a car. And I said, no, I don't have a car. You don't have a car? I said, no, I don't have a car. I have a bicycle. She said, what? And I said, a bicycle. She said, and she's almost glossed over this because Hassan and Ali, she didn't want them. She was, and when they left, then I had an absolute earful. She said, did you really have to say that you have a bicycle? You could have said that you had a Mercedes. Hassan and Ali, they think that, you know, and just she gives me, and my two sons, And my wife is sitting there looking at me, just saying, poor Yasser. And then she said, you know what Hassan al-Mahdi said to me? Why doesn't he leave and he come and work here at the University of Petra in Amman? Because everybody would know. And it's as though my mother and her cronies, Hassan al-Mahdi, sit down and do the league tables for the universities of the world. And they think that Cambridge is really way down. So this is sort of, and I'm telling this is sort of kind of Palestine. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to bring Palestine on that side. And if you look to the right, I don't really think that people would know unless they have known Scotland. This is a picture, and I think Avinav will know it. This is Edinburgh on the left, on the right. Edinburgh is on the right. So there's Jerusalem on the left, Edinburgh on the right, because my two sons were born there, and this is my son Sinan, who's finishing university this year. He's wearing a kilt, Scottish kilt. Now, what is interesting about this is that the spire that you see there is St. Giles Cathedral, which is the main cathedral in the city. Now, St. Giles, according to my brother who died, and I talk about him, he died in Austria in 2000. He said, oh, St. Giles. I said, yes. He said, do you know that the Scots, when they participated in the Crusades, went to St. Giles, which is St. Giles. So he connected, in my own mind, perhaps this is mythological, connected St. Giles with St. Giles with Palestine. So here I am on the left-hand side of the picture. My son, who is in the middle, he's on the right-hand side of the picture. And he's looking, and he immediately sees his world, and he sees my world. But also I wanted to decenter the Dome of the Rock, and I wanted to bring the church to the front. So I wanted to say all those things from sort of this picture. So the idea was constructed by me and Edinburgh University Press. So my son was taken to the Sinan. He went into Edinburgh, was taken around, several sort of shots, and he felt like a star. They thought he was a film star. He's tall, 6'3", 6'4", blue eyes like his granddad, and people came and took pictures with him, and he was sort of so happy and so pleased. So this is the story of the cover. I wanted the blue sky. It's almost Palestinian sky, but Scottish sky. And if you look at the being Palestinian and the thing there that separates the main title from the subtitle, the two things that these are the St. George's crosses, right? Because I wanted also a bit of, but also in Scottish style. So I wanted all of that to come together. I really wanted to talk about all of that. And then I talk about my father who is inside it. And through my father, because he worked in Tiberias, then Jews, Christians, all kinds of people come together. And Tiberias is that place where everybody is like a melting pot. So I wanted to recreate that image of Palestine where there was a time when Kurds, Arabs, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and others came together and lived together. And I was sort of saying, this is the kind of Palestine that I imagine in my own head. So it is, the picture really is a reflection. It's my reflection. It is my reflection, but without words. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to explain it.
That's wonderful. Sometimes you can judge a book by the cover, actually. So if you agree, Yasser, maybe we could open up if there are friends, colleagues, visiting other authors wish to talk. Saad, please.
I'm curious about the Jewish Palestinian. Was it Ilan Halevi or who was it that you were seeking?
In Berlin?
Yeah.
I think it was. Yeah, I think because I'm part of a group that's trying to sort of to revitalize Jewish Arabness or Arab Jewishness. And I was told about him by a friend in Berlin, but it was too late. But I'm keeping him for other projects, which I hope he will take part in.
Other questions, please.
I can't help but thinking about how universal the situation you're describing is. One could describe it as a diaspora nationality. And there are many diaspora nationalities. So my question is, how can reflection upon the troubled path of the Palestinian people help in this time when there's a new diaspora, the Syrian diaspora is emerging in Europe, And Europe is discussing this issue from basically a position of fear of their own demographic decline and the possibility of fostering nationalities, this sense of nationality that's transnational, as something that, rather than being divisive, is in fact more human, more international.
Well, I sometimes joke by, say, in the Arab world, we're all Palestinians. And I've written a piece in Arabic for Al-Arabi Al-Jadid. It's called أنا من البلاد المنكوبة. I am from the countries that have experienced a catastrophe. And let me tell you how it goes.
From the word Nakba.
From Nakba, Mankuba. Now, I travel in the Arab world for lots of reasons, and wherever I go, people say to me, "Where are you from?" And I change my accent. I tend to go towards a Fasiha kind of Arabic, not Fasiha. And they sometimes say, "Are you Iraqi? Are you this? Are you that?" And I always say, I start by saying, "أنا من الوطن العربي." I say, "What does that mean?" I say, "I'm an Arab." They say, "What does that mean?" I say, "Okay, أنا من البلاد المنكوبة." And then they say to me, "Oh, are you Syrian?" I say, "No." "Are you Iraqi?" I say, "No." And they say, "You're not Yemeni, you don't look Yemeni. You're not Libyan, are you Libyan?" I say, "No." And then actually in Morocco, Abdul Rahim bin Hadda, a historian whom we know, he didn't believe me. So we were visiting a university and the president took us back to the train station. And he said to me, "Are you from Qatar?" I said, "No." And he said to him, "He's from Bilal Mankuba." And he said, "Are you from Bahrain?" And then I would say, "I'm from Palestine." And suddenly everybody is really shocked. Now the tragedy was this: I was in Ramallah, in the upper sort of market side of Ramallah. And they said to me, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm in Bilad al-Mankuba." And they said, "Are you Syrian?" "Are you Iraqi?" And I said, and then when I told them that I was Palestinian, they were very surprised. Let me say to you that I think that lots of Arabs have become Palestinian, but they can never be Palestinian. Because I can imagine a time when a Syrian could go back. I can imagine a time when an Iraqi could go back. I can imagine a time when a Yemeni will go back. I can imagine a time when the Lebanese could go back, right? But I can't imagine a time while Zionism is in control in Palestine that a Palestinian could go back except as a tourist. And also with permission to you might not even be able to get in. So I think really, although the experience might be the same, but the future resolution of it is very, very different. The Palestinians can't go back. The Palestinians can't claim back their property. Palestinians, a Syrian would be able to go back to Hama, to Homs, to Aleppo, and reclaim their property and to somehow, reintegrate themselves in Syria. Palestinian can't do that.
Would your son say the same thing? That the children born in another country have essentially lived the diaspora, have no memory, no lived memory of coming from the place of origin, answer the question quite the same way?
I think, according to what I've seen here, read here, it is summed up in one expression. Memory is experience and experience is memory. And I think somehow memory has become a life experience for many, for many sort of young generation Palestinians. I know that my two sons, I don't know if they will go back or not, but certainly they, in their own minds, they somehow think that they have the right and there is the expectation and there's also the duty on them to produce a kind of return, because it's about really some kind of resolution. And without the possibility of return, there is no closure. And I think if we think about it in those terms, although you might not physically return, and in the prologue I talk about either returning or their country being returned to them.
Right.
That's what I meant by it. The country being returned to you. You might not want to return to it, but it's being returned to you. And then that will bring sort of the closure and the resolution. So I'm always very wary of comparing the Palestinian situation with the tragedies and the catastrophes and the nakabat that we have in the Arab world now. They're categorically and categorially different. They're ontologically different. They're in very many ways very, very different.
I just want want to say, Anna, I liked very much the expression "البلاد المنكوبة"
Yes.
because it included Cuba.
Mhm.
I mean, Cuba, you, like unintentionally, you added Cuba to it, and it's a Cuba place.
And there's a great piece about Cuba. It is by Sarah Al-Hamoud. And she talks about, she's from Tunis Aya, which is somewhere between Nablus and Ramallah. And she talks about a small village. Tunis Aya is one of the most gorgeous villages in Palestine. And in it, she talks about her great-grandfather or some who immigrates, and then she goes and looks for the family. And then she finds the family because they have changed her names. And all they had was about a pile of letters written in Arabic, the last one of which was 1954. And then they said, and so she could read them. So there's something also about Cuba, and it just shows Cuba. It shows you that the Palestinian diaspora is all over the place, everywhere. Sorry.
I just wanted to add that yes, there is something very specific about being Palestinian, and with the root Nakba in Mankube, when the Palestinian says "Ana min balad Mankube," it's something very specific. But I think right now in the US, what's happening with the presidential election, I can easily see "Ana min balad Mankube." Look around. What is this? So this is where the borderline between Palestine being both a reality and a metaphor. It can function as both.
Hala is Hala. Hello, Hala. Thank you for coming. Hala also is a contributor, and we wanted her to read a bit of her contribution. To me, I didn't realize that I knew Hala's father, and we worked together. By the way, this is Hanna Haidar, here, not here. And Hanna, this is Nath's daughter.
Oh, hi.
Right. And so so would it be possible for you to read a bit of your...
Yes, absolutely. I left my copy on the train. So I
We
donated it to the MTA subway system. So I hope someone is going to be...
I was telling
I'm
Philip.
sure you'll hear from NYPD soon.
I already have. So.
Hannah won, she's a poet and she's written a wonderful piece, like many others.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Professor Sleiman and to Philip for, are you Philip? Hey Philip, what's up? For being so, for involving me in this process and for being so, especially so responsive. But thank you guys. Diaspora is the sharp longing for that which remains nameless, an echo of some lost music. Often it is not memory, it is wistfulness. It is the men of your childhood leaning tensely towards news reports on the television. They curse and smoke and crack pumpkin seeds between their teeth as politicians and armies flicker on the screen. These men are your family. Father, uncle, cousin, you grew up listening to their talk of wars and refugees, of the houses left behind. They speak of cities across the ocean, and you learn that blad is just another way of saying remember. Some nights you tiptoe out of your little bed and pause in the doorway. The television light dapples their faces, and unseen, you watch the fires and bombings and bulldozers in another land. Diaspora. It is the trail that you like to retrace sometimes, the flag on your father's desk, the chain of turns and valleys and choices that scattered your family, that fated you to have a life of America and lipstick and Beirut nightclubs and poetry instead of the ones that your cousins have. An upbringing in Kuwait, a childhood in Wichita, or even a life in Gaza. Some of them never even leaving the seaside, watching the skyline brim with white phosphorus. Diaspora. It is your name becoming another, an Americanized rendering, a flowering plant with toxic berries, holly. This new name falls easily from your teacher's mouth, from the other children. There is a blooming relief when you return to Arab cities to hear your old name again. Nobody ever complains of the guttural H. Your grandmother, father's mother, she lay on her deathbed in Syria, face creased in pain, as she named a Palestinian village. In the years that follow, you will ask your father to repeat it over and over. You will write it down on the corners of notebooks, recite it at parties. You will forget it, and when you forget it, you tell yourself that if you cannot remember it, then it becomes mislaid, vanished. Diaspora. It is the songs and verses and stories, the landscape you paint in your mind's eye, a place you architect to carry all the things you love in this world. Bread with za'atar and fig jam, your father's accent, Mediterranean sunrises, dabke drums. This is where you keep them safe. This becomes Palestine. It is a slender gray box in the closet of your Manhattan apartment. Inside it, there are a dozen keys, small and large. You lose track of which cities they belong to, which doors. Diaspora, it is how you never leave an apartment without saying goodbye to the walls and windows as if they were lovers. How upon returning to Arab soil, and this is what your life feels like, an endless series of departures and returns. Upon returning, you stand quietly at dusk, eyes shut as the echoing voice of the Adhan fills the veins of your cities with a call to prayer. Your grandmother, mother's mother, she named her firstborn, the one that died within a month, Yafa. She stretches her legs on a balcony, her face tilted towards the sun, as she says, I thought it was the most beautiful name. Diaspora. It is the fitful, dexterous love affairs with cities. Writing about Jerusalem from a hotel room in Bangkok, seeing a Beirut sky on New Year's Eve, remembering a woman you once knew in Vienna. It is the wandering. The impatience that you once thought you inherited from your father, but which you now know you inherited from lost soil, a homeland waltzing him into restlessness, leaving him to live a life of cardboard boxes, dots on a map, the endless scent of freshly painted rooms. Hirai. It is the word lighting up your cell-phone screen, your father telling you now, immediately, go look up its definition. The definition, it's a Welsh word indicating homesickness tinged with grief and wistfulness over one's lost homeland. And when you do look up the definition, you sit amazed, hand over throat for minutes at the precision of it, how it has so perfectly summed up such an impossible feeling. You are enormously grateful that there are words such as this one, diaspora. It is the 7 buses you have to take, the buses that rumble to Nablus and Ramallah, to Akka, where your grandfather took his first breath, to Bethlehem, where you drink water sweetened with honey, to Yafa, where you sit on sand and touch seawater and cry. Diaspora is an endless absence, time-lapse photography in reverse. It is the desire to become an archaeologist, to become the keeper of memories belonging to others, to remember names of villages long buried in dust. Diaspora is reminding yourself in the bleakest moments, another war, another smattering of bombs, that as long as you have lungs and air to fill them, you and those that come after you will be the memento, the living memory of place.
Bassem Khader's daughter is, where's Bassem? Oh, thank you very much indeed. Let me just say, I'm really sorry, and I have to apologize to you and to Bassem for the fact that the book had taken so long to appear, because Bassem is a contributor, and he passed away before the book was out. And I actually do mention this in the prologue. Would you be kind enough to read us a little bit from your father's entry?
Sure.
Yeah. I have a... We have had 3 readings, and you can see how diverse and different these readings are. And this is different meanings of Palestine.
So my father definitely carried with him the pain and tragedy of Palestine. And he was a very rational man, but when it came to Palestine, he was very emotional. And so I think that transference happened with his children, in that, to your point about do the upcoming generations, even if we've had no memory of the Nakba, do we still carry that anger and rage and pain? And I think there is a part of that that is transferred to generations. So we want to fight for justice, but we want to do it in a way where we keep love in our hearts, and we don't want the baggage of hatred in our hearts and soul. So this is a piece that my father submitted before he passed away. He was born in Jaffa in 1938, and he spent most of his life with the UN. And he called it Badge of Honor. Within Palestinian society, my identity is established by reference to my religion, Roman Catholic, clan, Daibis, and place of origin, Zibabde. In the wider world, the only identity I carry or that matters to me is being Palestinian. It was not always so. As I rose through the ranks of the United Nations and in my early years in the United States, there was persistent advice to play down my identity, if not suppress it altogether. Indeed, Palestinian friends of mine felt they had to be of Greek origin after their maternal grandmothers in order to make it and integrate in an inhospitable environment. What has being Palestinian meant to me? First and foremost, fighting injustice and helping the underdog, both professionally and personally. In time, I was able to unshackle myself from the political correctness of the day and expose double standards and the abuse of euphemistic language. This was not always without cost, but sacrifice, loss, and struggle are what being a Palestinian is all about. In the United Nations and other international organizations, staff are normally sponsored by their respective countries, although the theory is that international civil servants, apart from some political appointees, are selected on merit. So a Palestinian without a home country is decidedly at a disadvantage. In my case, I moved from toning down my Palestinian identity to wearing it publicly as a badge of honor, thanks in no small measure to the writings and a public appearance of the late Edward Said, who so eloquently captured our predicament. An indication of the hostility of the environment was that even before his illness, he was invited less and less to appear on or write for mainstream media. I applied to become a citizen of my adopted country, the United States, after retiring from UN service. When the Immigration Service came to issue my passport, the agent told me they had no country called Palestine, though I was indeed born in Jaffa, Palestine, during the British Mandate. I was furious and refused to be attached to any other country. Someone at the service had the brilliant idea of changing my birthplace to Gaza, another badge of honor. No country was shown, but neither was my identity in any doubt. My sense of being Palestinian is not about form, but even in my adopted country, I oppose any attempt to erase my country or my identity, convenient as that may be to some. As a descendant of peasant stock who have been attached to their land for hundreds of years, I have tried to make up for the loss of that physical attachment with cultural links, like collecting the old folkloric songs dating back to Ottoman times that my mother, and before her my grandmother, used to sing, or by gathering traditional Palestinian proverbs, a favorite hobby of my father. Some of the old songs bring tears to my eyes. A new generation of Palestinian young men and women is persevering identity through film, poetry, political activism, and now that I have more time on my hands, I make a point of taking part in events featuring their work and following their progress. I am particularly heartened by the number of women who are carving a name for themselves, an indication, if any, was indeed that Palestinian identity will not only be preserved, but rejuvenated. As an out-of-place Palestinian, I have traveled far and wide in the world trying to do some good, living up to, in some sense, the biblical injunction of being part of the salt of the earth, an appropriate role, one might say, for a person rooted in the Holy Land, deeply rooted like an ancient olive tree, yet violently uprooted. As a secular person, I have had little time for religious affiliations. In my adopted country, Christian churches, including my own, have bewilderingly failed to fight injustice, oppose war, or help the downtrodden. Having grown up in an Islamic culture, the call of the muezzin is as familiar to me as the sound of church bells. By the same token, current Islamophobia is offensive to me, as is the medieval Inquisition or Tsarist anti-Semitism. As for the religious arguments now used to justify my own dispossession, I take these with a grain of Dead Sea salt and know that history will expose them for the mythical narrative they are.
I traveled all the way from England, and I think when I go back, I'll be coughing like Rashid. He coughed because he came back from England. I'm getting to cough, even if I'm healthy, because he came back to England from America. So, but Amal Aqiq is here, and I'd like to ask her. Amal is different, and you'll see why. She provides a different kind of reading of Palestine, and you'll see in a moment.
Thank you. My name is Amal Aqiq, and most Palestinians don't know how to say my last name.
I'm sorry about that.
It's okay. And I'm Fallaha from Taibe, the center, not Taibe Ramallah, that's the beer. That's the other one. And I have another friend here, Tissam Azim from Taibe, so we have like two representing our hometown. Yeah. But then, because being Palestinian is all about the accent. So I say Aqiq is Laqaf, Fusha, but I say Aqiq because like that's, we say Kahwe. And then, Palestinians and diaspora, like you speak like my grandmother. Sure. So I'm just gonna read this, the synopsis that you want here. I was born in 1976 at Golda Meir Hospital in Kfar Saba, another Jewish town with a deformed Palestinian name. Portraits of the woman who declared to the world in 1969 that Palestinians did not exist can be found all over the hospital walls. I often wonder how my mother and the rest of the women from my small town and the other neighboring Palestinian villages felt giving birth there. Did Golda's ghost haunt them in the delivery room? Did they hear her scream from the picture, "Do not listen to the doctors, you have nothing inside"? I never asked my mother these questions, but I know that she pushed really hard. When she left the hospital, she carried me, her fourth child, together with a birth certificate printed with a Golda Meir Hospital letterhead. Several lines under Golda, my name appears in modern Hebrew script. The Jewish doctors told my mother I was a healthy child. They said nothing about raising healthy children with chronic alienation. Should I read the rest?
Please continue.
From 2000 to 2004, I commuted from my hometown at Taibe to Tel Aviv University. The almost daily 35-minute drive has left a critical mark on the formation of my exilic consciousness. For almost 2 years, the transportation of heavy machine became an hour. Radio Ajial from Ramallah became my best friend. I would listen to it while I watched the trucks diverge left to the construction site of the apartheid wall near Kalkulia, while the people from Kalkulia and their farmlands slowly disappeared in front of my eyes behind the rapidly rising militarized concrete. Their voices and the voices of the other Palestinians behind the apartheid wall rang out in the morning radio talk show. Some called to complain about the misery of occupation and the corruption of the Palestinian Authority. Some called to comment on social issues or to ask the radio presenters to play their favorite songs. Some dubbed their voices for commercial advertisement. The voices sounded familiar, close, and intimate. They became my faithful companions on the road, keeping me tuned to the life that still existed behind the wall. These voices would stay with me until I approached the first traffic light in northeastern Tel Aviv at the major intersection of Kfar Hayarok, the Green Village. I don't know what used to be the Palestinian name of the area buried underneath this jammed intersection, but there, when the radio wave was lost, I realized I had just crossed an invisible border. For years to come, I would ponder why I didn't call the radio to greet the people of Kalkilia. I should have told them that I still see them, despite witnessing how the wall had sealed them off.
Just wanted to add, Yasser, something about listening to all of this wonderful reflections. Not only the thing that I want to say, apropos your point about the difference between being Palestinian and other kinds of refugees or exile, etc. In principle, I agree. But if the conclusion is that because we can't go back, which means giving Zionism the permanence that is there and they have succeeded, I disagree. But more than that, the question is in the multiplicities of voices. There are voices that make you cry, voices that make you laugh, voices that make you think. And in a way, being outside Palestine has made you like a fish out of a water for you to recognize what it means to be Palestinian. I mean, if you were to imagine that this were not to happen, that Palestinian dispossession did not happen, Palestine would be a boring country like any other boring country. So all of this, excitement and this has to do with the fact that has made it possible, and also generational. Right now I'm the most senior member of my department, so I have history of this campus, our own very campus. That there were times, Mariam, you remember, we used to say Palestine.
And they would say Pakistan.
We'll talk it this way, and as soon as we got to the words, and now we have a Student for Justice in Palestine who just launched BDS. I mean, I remember, Mariam, you may remember when we did in 2003, Edward was still with us, Allah yarhamah. He thought we would never be able to do a Palestinian Film Festival. And he used to say, "Oh, you are a Shia crazy. You think that because he was a prince. I mean, anything he wanted to do, he go to Jonathan. Jonathan, we wanted, and then he said, "Oh no, we can't do it." When we wanted, for example, Mahmoud Darwish celebration here, you remember. Whereas I married Jasser, Kamran Rastegar, then her boyfriend, and I, the three of us, and Fatima Ali, who had a Pakistani assistant, the four of us did the Palestinian Film Festival. All under the radar, Rashid. There was nobody knew it until that Tuesday. So there are the new generation, and last year I was invited to chair something by the Student for Justice in Palestine. The courage, the imagination, the chutzpah, as we say in Brooklyn, that they have of them to claim the land, to claim the space, speak clearly, multiple voices. This is their campus, this is their university, and across the country, not just on this campus. Something is happening in terms of the freedom and creativity and power of this generation that I think is just insurmountable. Nothing can look at the possibilities and expansion of the BDS. We started, Mariam, you remember, back in 2002, we started just asking Colombia, would you please kindly divest from Caterpillar, the companies that are selling military equipments. And we were soundly defeated and ridiculed and so forth. But now is a whole different ballgame across the country.
Well, I agree with you. Maybe we experienced that in Europe before you have done it in the States. Let me just say that when I say to Syrians and others that there is some difference, I'm thinking of sort of my own lifetime. It is possible for a Syrian to imagine that in their own lifetime they might be able to go back. I can't imagine that in my own lifetime that I would be able to go back. So I'm not talking about a difference that extends forever, but I'm thinking about a difference that extends through person's lifetime, my lifetime, and somebody of a similar age lifetime in Syria and Iraq. I agree with you. And I agree that there have been great, amazing advances in terms of the ability of the younger generation to assert with confidence, but also with humanity, what Palestine stands for, and that's very important. However, there is, I think, there's a difference between Palestinian experience and Syrian experience. I think you see the absurdity in what Amal had read. There's a Palestinian girl being born in a hospital that's called Golda Meir's Hospital, who denied that the Palestinians exist, you know? And then she gives you that scenario. It is the absurdity. There's an absurdity about the Palestinian situation, which is wonderful. And I'm not really trying to brag or to do anything. In 2011, I was made a commander of the Order of the British Empire by the Queen for my contribution to scholarship in the United Kingdom. And I laughed my head off. And my wife and mother said, why are you laughing off? I said, look at us Palestinians. I become a commander of an empire that doesn't exist. And that's right. And then I'm a commander who can't command anything, right? And this kind of honor could just only happen to a Palestinian, as it were. It happens to others. And I think there is this sort of quixotic kind of absurdity, which I absolutely love about being Palestinian. But I agree with you. I mean, what you have heard today, but also the younger generation, they are greatly assertive. I mean, Asma Rimawi came from Harvard to Cambridge, and she was as active, maybe more active in Cambridge than she was, because I think it's a little bit more receptive. There isn't a great deal of courage being a Palestinian in the United Kingdom. Maybe there's greater courage being a Palestinian elsewhere.
Not anymore.
But I agree with you. I think the younger generation are the hope. I mean, Hala, her piece, she said, well, okay, it is even as long as there is air to breathe, to fill my lungs, Palestine and also other peoples. And she's a third generation Palestinian. So I'm full of hope in that respect. But at the same time, I get wary when other Palestinian, other Arabs start to say that their situation is even worse than the Palestinians. And I say, excuse me, please don't compete with me about misery, okay? We have copyrighted misery, okay? And please don't compete with me. This territory, this domain, this whole thing it is ours, and don't try to claim it to yourself, right? And that's what I really, and then they say, oh, Bashar al-Assad is worse than Netanyahu. And I say, excuse me, please don't tell me that, right? He's really, really bad, but he's not, you know. So there is somehow the Arab world now, different people are competing to say, well, the most miserable people are us. And I'm saying, well, the most miserable, but the most resilient people are the Palestinians. So there's misery, as it were, visited upon them, but there's also resilience, and it's the resilience that really gives me hope.
I think you're sounding very Jewish.
Myself?
Yeah.
Well, I think, I'll tell you, maybe I am Jewish, because when I give talks in...
when you say we're the only people who suffer that...
No, I think maybe I am Jewish. I mean, when I give talks in the UK, I always say, when Jewish audiences, I always say, I want to become a Jew. Can you please arrange for me to become a Jew?
Yeah, we should do it collectively.
Yeah, and they say, why do you want to become a Jew? I said, I just want to claim, as a Palestinian, I want to claim the right of return as a Jew. Is that okay? That's what I want to do. I just want to go back as a Palestinian Jew. Is that it? Maybe, yes, I am a Palestinian, but actually quite a lot of what we do predates Judaism in Palestine. And so, because I see Syrians, I see Iraqis, and I say, okay, no, we have claimed all of that for ourselves, the Nakba, and leave it to us, and just get on with your lives. So I'll help you to get on with your lives.
Speaking of Jewish as metaphor, I can't tell you how delighted I am with Bernie Sanders, because for the first time I can vote for a Jewish socialist from Brooklyn. We are in it together. Who is actually older than me. Still older than me. Well, you know, Edwards, famous phrase that he's the last Jewish intellectual. But I think they're also, pardon me?
Where do you think my piece came from?
Yeah. But I also think that it's a time for us to complicate a metaphor. I think that we're ready for the first Muslim intellectual also, not the terrorists.
But I know when I said my mother is Jewish, I forgot to add, and I need to add this because somebody might, and I think my mother, please forgive me. When my mother stands up to pray, she always prays for me, right, and for my sisters and brothers. And what does she say? It's quite interesting. Now, we think that Muslims, this is a patriarchal kind of system. My mother stands and says, Rabbna, do this for Yasser. Ibn Salima, her name is Salima. Right? تَيَعْرِفُ الْحَقِّ مَنْ هُوَ. Right? So I identify him by his mother's name, not by his father's name. And only God knows that I'm telling the truth. Because actually also in Palestine in olden days, they would say to my mother, is that your son? She would say, إنسد الوالدة. Yeah? إنسد الوالدة. Right? Okay? And what does it mean? It means that, just translate it into English, she is saying that he is my son and I'm telling you the truth. Because his father would never ever know whether he is his son or not. But she would know whether I'm his. And so this idea of being identified in front of God through your mother's lineage, which is not sort of consistent with an Islamic interpretation of lineage, right, is something which precedes and predates Judaism. It's not something that Muslims had taken from Judaism. And let's also remember, go back, Ben Gurion in the early Zionists, they said, why are these Palestinians unhappy? We have come to take them back to their Judaism. You know? So there were Jews who became Christians, and some of them became then Muslims. So we're all Jews. And I always say, well, if Ben Gurion is telling me that I was a Jew, can you please just make me a Jew? So what I'm trying to say here is that there is resilience, but I hope that the resilience that you find amongst Palestinians claiming Palestine as, I hope, as an ethical place, would do it with humanism, would do it with all the understanding that is required for them to be worthy of all the meanings of the metaphorical meanings of Palestine.
I think we should not abuse your very generously giving us so much time. But I'm
very hungry now. You
no. I really simply want to thank you for bringing this absolutely magnificent collection of writings together, because as you know, writers and thinkers become fetishized every time you want to think of it in multiplicity of voices. And I'm going to stop here and ask my distinguished colleague, Professor Rashid Khalid, to say a few concluding words.
I'm inspired to say a few words by Emmett's story. I have a Golda Meir experience myself, and it ties. I'm going to, and it ties together with what we've just been discussing, which is this enormous change that's taken place on college campuses and that's taking place in public discourse in the United States and Europe. When I was an undergraduate, which is a very, very long time ago, it's before Golda Meir made this horrific statement of hers in 1969. We demonstrated against Golda Meir, who was speaking at Yale. This was, I think, 1968. And there were 3 of us. And there were hundreds of people coming to worship her. We were protected by campus security. We had to be protected by campus security because what we were doing was very, very unpopular, protesting Golda Meir. There were 3 of us, Charles Shemmass, who some of you live in Ramallah now, and I forget who the 3rd person was. I think I know who he is. He's passed away. And 2 of us were Arab American, me and Charles, and the other was just an American. And we were the most unpopular people on campus. And I see our students creating their apartheid wall during Israeli apartheid week. And there are more of them than there are of the counter-demonstrators. So things have really, really changed enormously. We, I think, are a long, long way away from that leading to political change or change in public discourse. Though, if you read the speech that Bernie Sanders didn't give to AIPAC, but instead gave in Idaho, you will see a speech, the first speech by an American presidential candidate, which actually talks about the real Palestine. It talks about things that no American politician would dare to say, or ever has dared to say since Harry Truman. It's a remarkable speech. I don't agree with every word in it, but it is a sign of the times. Something is coming. So I want to thank you all for coming. I want to ask you to thank Yasser for this wonderful book. We've heard 5, as it were, as it happened, female voices talk about their parents, talk about their children, talk about their connection to Palestine. It's a very, very true book in that respect because it includes people from multiple generations talking about their connection to Palestine, and it's very clear that each generation has a different connection. My children have a different connection than I have, which is different than my parents' connection. And I very much advise you to, I hope there are copies of the book left. Are there still? This is yours, by the way. This belongs to the publisher. So there's 4 copies. I very strongly recommend you buy this book, the 4 copies that are left. The bonus, in addition to these 102 wonderful stories, is that there's a picture of our own JJ, the person who helped me with this, in her natural habitat, which is a soccer field. So once again, let me ask you to join me in thanking Yasser and Hamid for this wonderful event.